For today at least, it seems that spring has finally come to break the grip of one of the most miserable winters in recent history. Today is Palm Sunday, which means that next week we can look forward to a family holiday replete with children excitedly wearing their brand new Easter clothes out into the mud to get grass stains on it while they hunt for Easter eggs. And the sanctuary, I hope, will be filled with women in spring hats. And now that the Final Four is over, husbands and wives can begin to break the icy silence in their homes and start to try to talk to each other again. So I know that the one thing that you all really want to hear me talk about today is the tortured logic of the Supreme Court's decision to dismantle campaign finance reform. Don't tell me I don't know my audience. I happened to be attending a conference in Washington, D.C. in 2005 when Chief Justice Roberts was nominated to the Supreme Court. I met an old friend of mine who's an attorney in D.C. for dinner one night, and she could hardly stop talking about how excited she was to have Roberts appointed to the Supreme Court. She had worked with him in a Washington law firm, and she told me, "Roger, you are going to love him. He's an ardent Catholic, a great family man, and one of the most honest and most intelligent people I have ever known." I can't remember exactly. I may have made some desultory comment about how unlikely it was that I would like anyone that was a friend of George Bush's, but then we moved on to our remarkably overpriced entrees. Everything in Washington, D.C. seems overpriced to me, but perhaps you have to see the cost of things through the eyes of one of Justice Roberts' Stone Age peers on the bench. Justice Antonin Scalia said regarding this McCutcheon versus FEC ruling that now lifts contribution limits from $75,000 per election cycle to $3.5 million. Justice Scalia said, "I don't think $3.5 million is a whole heck of a lot of money." So that once you can force yourself to say, "I don't think $3.5 million is a whole heck of a lot of money," then paying $75 for half of a chicken breast on a bed of sticky pasta makes more sense. But Justice Roberts, this ardent Catholic, this honest, intelligent man, said about this ruling, "Spending large sums of money in connection with elections, but not in connection to any effort to control the exercise of the office holder's official duties, does not give rise to a quid pro quo corruption, nor does the possibility that an individual who spends large sums may garner influence over or access to elected officials or political parties." Now, don't let that slip past you. Justice Roberts, this very bright legal mind, said that people who donate millions of dollars to political campaigns are not necessarily expecting anything for their money. They're not expecting to influence what the office holder will do, nor even to have greater access, that you can donate $100 million to a senatorial campaign, but if you call that senator, that doesn't mean that senator is going to make time to see you. And you have to say right up front that there's no way that you could claim that Justice Roberts is not a smart man. This is a very intelligent man who is also deeply entrenched inside the Washington bubble, who can straight-faced look into cameras and say that people will donate millions of dollars and expect nothing in return. These recent Supreme Court decisions that have opened the floodgate to unlimited political influence peddling is an undeniable attempt on the part of a ruling elite to hold on to power even as their voter base is quickly dying off. They're manipulating voter registration, they're gerrymandering voter districts, and changing access to the ballot so that a larger number of the poor, the elderly, and minorities will not be able to cast votes. At the same time, they're removing all accountability about the money in politics or even having to identify where your money comes from, so that the party of the super wealthy can hold on to control of the government for a little longer. So when Justice Roberts says that multi-million-dollar donations have no influence on either party or access to elected officials, he's not dumb enough to believe that that is true. But here's the point of my narrative. He wants to believe that it's true. And by wanting to believe it, he can convince himself to deny reality, lie to himself, lie to the world, and ignore the consequences as though he had nothing to do with those consequences. And one last political point, because I believe this needs to be said. Sheldon Adelson, the casino operator who donated $93 million during the 2012 election cycle, is a conservative Jewish Zionist. Now let me say, even if I were the dictator of the world, and there are days that I think I should be, but even if I were, and I could control national boundaries at my own will, I don't know what I would do to solve the Israeli-Palestinian problem. We are 60, 70 years deep into a wrong-headed land theft and resettlement program that has not worked and is not workable. And I don't know what you should do to fix it. I have feelings of deep sympathy on both sides. I've been on the West Bank. I've been in Israel. I've met people on both sides of that divide who've spent their childhoods living in underground bunkers, avoiding being attacked by the other side. It is a complicated problem, and I have no idea how to resolve it peacefully. Still, what I know with certainty is that the American military subsidies of Israel are so huge and so irrational, specifically because of the financial influence of our government through political donations from people like Sheldon Adelson, people who think like he does. Adelson donates tens of millions of dollars to political campaigns, and then our government gives over $3 billion a year in military subsidies to the state of Israel. None of us here could make a large enough political contribution to influence our government, but everyone here has an increased tax burden to pay for Israel's military. So this becomes a social justice issue for everyone. With all due respect for Justice Roberts' wishful thinking, I'm suggesting that there is not only a quid pro quo involved in these political contributions, but I'm saying that their quid pro quo comes with such a huge price tag for you, for me, and more importantly, it keeps us from being able to do things like extending unemployment benefits to the people who have not been able to find a job for years, or providing mental health services to returning veterans who then become inclined, without appropriate support, to shoot up their peers on military bases, or to have appropriate and safe schools for children in poor neighborhoods. You just think about the blighted city of Detroit. What if we put $3 billion this year into recovery into Detroit? What would Detroit look like? So when we make a decision that we're going to support the military of Israel at this level, that comes at a sacrifice of things that we as a moral people should be doing for the poor and vulnerable in our own country or in other countries. If I can bring this back to the gospel lesson today and pose the larger question, why is it that otherwise good people tell lies and act like they're not lying? Why does that happen? I'm inclined to take my friend's word about Justice Roberts at face value. She knew John Roberts as an attorney, as a family man, as a business partner, and as a Christian. Now the whole world that pays attention, the part of the world that pays attention, can see that he's also a hypocritical liar. But what does John Roberts see every morning when he looks in the mirror? My guess is that when John Roberts looks into the bathroom mirror as he shaves, that he sees in the mirror a brilliant Supreme Court Chief Justice who's a good family man and a good Catholic. So we read the passion narrative in the Gospels. Jesus is falsely accused. His brothers and sisters don't appear in the narrative. They're nowhere to be found. His good friends fade back into the shadows. Religious leaders conspire with political officials to trump up a case against him and murder him. The priests can say, "Thank God we saved the people from that sociopath they had been following." His siblings can say, "Well, his arrogance finally got the best of him." Political leaders probably didn't say much at all because Jesus never came close to that $75,000 contribution cap, so he probably didn't appear on their radar screen. We read the passion narrative of Jesus not because we think that Jesus was God or even because we think the gospel writers are giving us a reliable historical account. Trust me, they are not. We read it as a story, as an archetypal story. We read it then because it reflects our own story. When you read any great story, the reason that you have feelings about a really great novel or a really great movie is because you identify with one or more of the characters. It's your emotional connection to those characters that makes it hard for you to go to sleep without reading yet another chapter. Our reaction to great stories is directly related to the degree to which we identify with, we feel with the character. In every country of the world, children have a dress-up holiday. Why do you think Halloween is such a big deal in our country? It's because children have this urgent desire to dress up like one of the characters. They want to be one of the characters of their favorite stories. Now, it does worry me when you see a kid choose to be Darth Vader or Freddy Krueger. I don't want to overinterpret that. Maybe Brooke could tell us more about what that might mean when a child chooses to be one of the villains, or when college-age girls always seem to dress up like prostitutes. But I digress. When you read the passion narratives, you probably want to identify with Jesus, right? As sad as the outcome of the narrative is, a lot of your feeling about hearing the story is because you feel like you've been there. You don't want to be the callous and morally indifferent governor of Palestine. You don't want to be the unfaithful friends. You don't want to be the lying religious leaders, the backstabbing best friend who throws Jesus under the bus. Nobody wants to be Peter on that day. Nobody wants to be Judas or Pilate or Caiaphas. But what you want is to feel a resolution to your own sense of having been betrayed. Still, you look at this narrative, and to the degree to which it describes a historical event, what do you want to bet that Caiaphas went home that night, brushed his teeth, flossed, and went to bed and slept like a baby? And Pilate got up the next day and looked into the mirror and saw a powerful and wise ruler of Palestine. The Gospels tell us that Peter was ashamed and Judas killed himself, but if this were a real-life drama, I bet that they both would have gotten up the next day and said to themselves, "I sure am glad that we don't have to put up with any more of that melodrama that Jesus always creates." The passion narrative has staying power through the centuries because, at some level, we have lived it. We have felt it. Like all archetypal narratives, then, it is cathartic for us to hear it again, to feel it again. But where's the larger point, other than that it feels good to sort of get that over with? What's the larger point? What if Clarence Thomas, also an ardent Catholic, had looked at Justice Scalia and said, "You're joking. $3.5 million is an obscene amount of money to contribute to a political campaign. It could destroy democracy." What if Justice Kennedy would have pulled Roberts aside and said, "Do you realize that the legacy of your court is going to make you look like a corrupt joke in the eyes of historians? Don't you want to work to preserve democracy rather than flushing democracy down the toilet?" We somehow live in a world in which a president and a vice president can say that torturing prisoners is not torture because we did it, and if we did it, it couldn't be torture. And presented with that circular logic, the entire nation shrugs its shoulders, and Bush and Cheney never go on trial for the obvious war crimes that they committed. Could it be that we are willing to pass on such things because we have grown so accustomed to it in our personal lives that people wish that something was true, so they tell themselves that it is true? Have we allowed our conscience to wander so far from reality, so far into the territory of believing that we are always innocent, that we believe our own lies, that we can now abandon a family member, throw a brother or sister under the bus, turn our back on one of our best friends, and acquiesce to falsehood so that we can keep ourselves out of an uncomfortable fray? Have we come so far that we do that automatically without ever thinking about it? Would any of us here have rushed in and saved Jesus from Judas's betrayal in the garden, or Caiaphas's false allegations that night, or Pilate's depraved indifference the next day? If you wouldn't, if you know that you wouldn't have, then the decisions of the Supreme Court has recently made, they become par for the course. Once we get comfortable with how we lie to ourselves and the people around us lie to themselves, once we get comfortable with that, then we have every reason to expect continued tragedy. I think that what we as spiritual people owe the rest of the universe is more than a casual acquaintance with the truth. When it really matters, when someone is getting hurt, don't let your friends lie to themselves about their involvement. Don't turn your back on your siblings when they really need your support. Don't throw your friends under the bus because doing so could raise your status or give you a temporary feeling of power. Don't be Pilate. Don't be Judas. Don't be Caiaphas or Peter or any of the unnamed siblings or the disciples who risked nothing and cost Jesus his life. You be the game changer. You be the truth teller. You be the one who refuses to go along just to get along. You'll have fewer friends, I guarantee you, but I believe the friends you have will be better. And when you look in the mirror in the morning, you won't have to lie to yourself.
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at reverenddray@aol.com for more information.